Jiang Xiaohui gets on the bus early, gets off late, and loves sitting in the last row. One time, Jiang Xiaohui was daydreaming on the bus when a pair of black leather shoes appeared in his line of sight. A deep voice asked, "Excuse me, is the seat inside taken?" That was the first time Jiang Xiaohui saw Peng Feng. The man was dressed in a suit and tie. Even in the crowded bus, he appeared composed, as if strolling leisurely through a garden. Peng Feng got off one stop before Jiang Xiaohui, at a tech park full of IT and high-tech companies, home to some of the nation's top 500 enterprises. Peng Feng looked like a typical elite, someone who didn't belong on public transport. So Jiang Xiaohui thought to himself, I probably won't see him on this bus again. But Jiang Xiaohui was wrong. One day he saw Peng Feng again. The stop where Peng Feng got on was always crowded. Jiang Xiaohui, along with the other passengers already seated, leisurely watched the people squeezing onto the bus. And then, among the crowd, he spotted that familiar face, the man who had once spoken to him. As he sat there, Jiang Xiaohui shamelessly took the opportunity to steal glances at Peng Feng. Peng Feng stood on the outer edge of the crowded section. Suddenly, he looked up, gazing toward the back of the bus, and their eyes met. For a split second, Jiang Xiaohui panicked. Had his staring been too obvious? Too intense? Had Peng Feng noticed? He quickly averted his eyes, pretending to be looking at the scenery outside. Later, when Jiang Xiaohui sneakily glanced around, he noticed that others were also looking at the crowded boarding scene below. Feeling relieved, he thought, my reaction shouldn't have been too weird. And so Jiang Xiaohui secretly memorized Peng Feng's boarding stop. At some point, Jiang Xiaohui realized he often encountered a handsome young man on his daily commute, the same man who had once asked about the seat. Peng Feng always stood nearby, within Jiang Xiaohui's line of sight. Jiang Xiaohui was thrilled. This vantage point made it easy for him to steal glances at Peng Feng. Their workplaces must have been close, their work hours similar, because almost every morning and evening they ended up on the same bus. Jiang Xiaohui was into men, specifically Peng Feng's type, so he started paying more attention to him. Peng Feng got on the bus later than Jiang Xiaohui and got off earlier. This routine delighted Jiang Xiaohui. It meant he could watch Peng Feng for the entirety of his bus ride without missing a single moment. Peng Feng's boarding stop was in a bustling area where many wealthy people lived. Those who could afford cars drove, while those who couldn't had no choice but to wait for the bus. Jiang Xiaohui observed that sometimes Peng Feng would rush onto the bus enthusiastically. Other times he would stand below, scanning the interior as if evaluating whether squeezing in was worth the trouble before deciding to board. Sometimes, when the crowd was overwhelming, Peng Feng remained unhurried. Jiang Xiaohui would grow anxious on his behalf, worrying that he might not make it onto the bus. But somehow, Peng Feng always succeeded in getting on. One evening, on his way home, Jiang Xiaohui noticed something unusual. The bus had reached Peng Feng's usual stop, but Peng Feng hadn't gotten off. A thought crossed Jiang Xiaohui's mind, or maybe it was just impulse. I have time anyway. Let's see where he's going. The bus continued past stop after stop. When it reached Jiang Xiaohui's stop, Peng Feng still hadn't moved. Since Peng Feng didn't get off, Jiang Xiaohui decided to stay on as well. The bus went all the way to the final stop, and still Peng Feng hadn't moved. By now, only 3 people remained on the bus: Jiang Xiaohui, Peng Feng, and the driver. Jiang Xiaohui glanced outside. The final stop was in a remote area. He had never been there before. From the driver's seat, a voice shouted, "End of the line! Everyone off!" Both Jiang Xiaohui and Peng Feng silently stood up. As they stepped off the bus, Peng Feng suddenly turned and asked, "You live out here?" Jiang Xiaohui was startled and shook his head. "No, I zoned out and missed my stop. What about you?" For a moment, Jiang Xiaohui thought Peng Feng's face darkened. Peng Feng replied in a steady voice, "I'm waiting for someone." Then, he pulled out his phone and made a call, asking someone to come pick him up. Jiang Xiaohui, meanwhile, was busy admiring Peng Feng's posture as he made the call, thinking, "Damn, he looks good doing that." After hesitating, Jiang Xiaohui hopped back onto the bus, paid the fare again, and sat in the last row, parallel to where Peng Feng stood outside. As the bus pulled away, Jiang Xiaohui turned back to glance at him. Peng Feng was still standing there, alone. Zhang Xiaohui had the sudden urge to get off and keep him company, but since the bus had already started moving, stopping now would only earn him a scolding from the driver. Besides, they barely knew each other. Jumping off to keep a stranger company would be weird, right? But he talked to me first. As the bus rumbled on, Zhang Xiaohui thought, even though we didn't talk much, even though it was just small talk, at least now I know his name. After that, they started talking more. Sometimes, when the seat beside Zhang Xiaohui was empty, Peng Feng would sit down. The bus seats were narrow. Zhang Xiaohui noticed how uncomfortable Peng Feng looked, his long legs unable to stretch. So the next time Peng Feng approached, Zhang Xiaohui scooted inward to make room. Then he looked up and smiled at Peng Feng. The first time he did this, Peng Feng seemed momentarily stunned, but he quickly regained composure, gave a polite smile, and said softly, "Thank you." Though sitting inside was cramped and uncomfortable, Zhang Xiaohui thought, so worth it. One day, while taking the bus, Zhang Xiaohui gave up his seat to a woman holding a child. As Zhang Xiaohui steadied himself, he realized that Peng Feng was standing right behind him. Peng Feng held onto the bus wall, his body pressed closely against Zhang Xiaohui, almost as if he was embracing him. The bus had stopped for too long at the previous station, and now it was moving hastily, accelerating, braking, and turning left and right. Zhang Xiaohui swayed uncontrollably. At one point, when the bus turned left, he was forced to lean to the right. He didn't want to crush the child, but the inertia was too strong, and he had no time to reach for the bus wall to steady himself. Zhang Xiaohui panicked. At that moment, Peng Feng, who had been silent the entire time, suddenly reached out, pulling him into his arms. Even after the bus stabilized, Peng Feng did not let go. He just continued to hold him lightly. That day, Peng Feng did not get off at his usual stop for work. When Zhang Xiaohui reminded him, Peng Feng responded with a cold expression, saying he had other matters to attend to. Zhang Xiaohui was startled by his coldness and, feeling awkward, did not press further. He guessed that his inability to stand properly had forced Peng Feng to support him, and maybe Peng Feng found him too weak and troublesome, hence the cold demeanor. When they reached the stop where Peng Feng usually got off, many passengers exited, making the space less crowded. Since two adjacent seats became available, both of them sat down. Zhang Xiaohui, still feeling embarrassed and self-reproachful, did not dare to look at Peng Feng or initiate conversation. As he was about to get off the bus, he mustered his courage and said, "Goodbye." Peng Feng nodded at him calmly. Zhang Xiaohui wasn't sure if it was just his imagination, but Peng Feng seemed to smile. One evening, Zhang Xiaohui had to work overtime and missed the bus, so he took a taxi home. As the taxi passed his usual bus stop, he thought he saw someone who looked a lot like Peng Feng. By the time he turned back to check, the car had already driven too far for him to see clearly. The next day, Peng Feng boarded the bus as usual and sat in the empty seat next to Zhang Xiaohui. After sitting for a while, Peng Feng suddenly asked, "Why didn't you take the bus yesterday?" Zhang Xiaohui was surprised that Peng Feng initiated a conversation with him and quickly answered, "I worked overtime last night and almost missed the last bus, so I took a taxi home." Peng Feng responded with an "oh," and then asked where Zhang Xiaohui worked, what his company was like, and how his job was going. Zhang Xiaohui liked Peng Feng's deep and elegant voice. It made conversations with him pleasant. Although Peng Feng didn't talk much, Zhang Xiaohui enjoyed their exchanges. Because he had a good impression of Peng Feng, he had no guard up and answered all of Peng Feng's questions. After listening, Peng Feng nodded thoughtfully and looked out the window. Zhang Xiaohui, eager to continue the conversation just to hear Peng Feng talk, casually remarked, "By the way, when I was in the taxi yesterday, I thought I saw someone at the bus stop who looked like you." Peng Feng remained silent. Zhang Xiaohui had to continue awkwardly laughing. "Haha, but how could you be at my stop so late? I must have been mistaken." Still, Peng Feng said nothing. Zhang Xiaohui felt embarrassed, and his smile faded. He suddenly thought that maybe Peng Feng didn't actually enjoy talking to him. Maybe all their previous exchanges were just polite small talk between seatmates. What was he getting so excited about? With this thought, Zhang Xiaohui fell silent. After a long pause, Peng Feng suddenly let out a soft hum and said, "I had already gotten off work by then." After saying that, he turned his head to the other side. Jiang Xiaohui wondered, was Peng Feng responding to my earlier remark? But he only pondered this in his heart. He no longer dared to overthink and assume things. Ironically, after sitting for a while, Peng Feng seemed to get bored. He turned back, glanced at Jiang Xiaohui, and asked, "I see you always go straight home after work. Don't you have a girlfriend to accompany?" Jiang Xiaohui replied, "Of course not. I don't even have a girlfriend." Seeing Peng Feng's skeptical expression, Jiang Xiaohui had an urge to mess up his neatly pressed suit and shout, "I'm serious! What girlfriend? I can't even date women!" Fortunately, Peng Feng eventually believed him and gave a simple, After that, Peng Feng seemed to be in a good mood and kept finding topics to chat about. Although Jiang Xiaohui didn't dare to take the initiative anymore, he answered every question, and their conversation went smoothly. Soon, Jiang Xiaohui reached his stop. This time, Peng Feng seemed to have other errands to run and remained seated. Jiang Xiaohui was reluctant to leave and turned back for one last look, only to meet Peng Feng's gaze directly. Peng Feng's lips curled slightly as he waved. Jiang Xiaohui's face remained flushed long after he got off the bus, and he practically ran toward his company. On Friday, it rained, and there were very few people at the bus stop. Jiang Xiaohui waited for a long time but still couldn't catch a bus. At this point, even hailing a taxi was difficult. As he was worrying about how to get home, a private car pulled up beside him and honked once to grab his attention. The window rolled down, revealing Peng Feng inside, calling for Jiang Xiaohui to get in. Jiang Xiaohui was stunned. Just then, the bus he had been waiting for finally arrived. He glanced at the bus, then back at Peng Feng, who was urging him to hurry up. Without hesitation, he chose Peng Feng. The moment he got into the car, Peng Feng handed him a towel to dry his hair. So thoughtful. Jiang Xiaohui thanked him, holding the towel while curiously looking around. He was surprised. Despite taking the bus every day, Peng Feng actually owned a car. And not just any car, a Mercedes-Benz. Jiang Xiaohui asked curiously, "Peng Feng, why don't you drive to work?" It couldn't be to save on gas money, right? That would be too funny, haha. Peng Feng replied smoothly, almost as if he had been waiting for the question. "This is a friend's car. He went out drinking, so I'm helping him drive it home." "Oh, I see." Jiang Xiaohui nodded in understanding. "You're such a good person." Peng Feng cleared his throat and said nothing. Jiang Xiaohui gazed out the window, only snapping out of his thoughts when Peng Feng asked where he lived. He suddenly realized that they were already approaching his neighborhood. Even though Peng Feng drove him all the way to his building entrance, Jiang Xiaohui still felt a little disappointed. Such a rare chance to be alone with him, and the time was so short. Jiang Xiaohui reluctantly waved goodbye to Peng Feng. It was a pity that Peng Feng had to deliver a car for someone else, so Jiang Xiaohui couldn't invite him up for a visit. As Jiang Xiaohui walked upstairs and opened the door, a thought suddenly occurred to him. Peng Feng was helping a colleague drive the car home, which meant he should have set off from the company, right? Peng Feng's workplace was one stop before Jiang Xiaohui's company, so how did Peng Feng manage to drive in such a way that he ended up at the bus stop where Jiang Xiaohui was waiting? Jiang Xiaohui couldn't figure it out, no matter how much he thought about it. Later, the two still met on the bus as usual. Interestingly, whenever the weather was bad or when Jiang Xiaohui worked overtime, Peng Feng's colleague would go out drinking and have Peng Feng drive his car home. The company where Jiang Xiaohui worked was doing worse and worse, and by the end of the year, it was finally acquired by a larger corporation. Everyone in the company was on edge, fearing that the new boss would come in and start firing people left and right, and that they would be among the first to go. Jiang Xiaohui was also nervous. He was just an unremarkable employee in the company, without any special skills or outstanding performance. If layoffs were coming, he would most likely be the first to be cut. The anxiety about losing his job weighed so heavily on him that even seeing Peng Feng every day couldn't bring him full happiness anymore. At the end of the month, the company's new general manager arrived to officially take over management and personnel decisions. Jiang Xiaohui and his colleagues gathered in the office to welcome their new boss. To his shock, he saw their usually fierce and overbearing department supervisor behaving obsequiously, leading in a tall, handsome young man while chattering incessantly. The young man frowned slightly, appearing a bit impatient, but he was still polite enough to endure it with grace. He raised his head and swept his gaze across the room until his eyes landed on Zhang Xiaohui, standing at the edge of the crowd. His gaze froze. Zhang Xiaohui silently mouthed Peng Feng's name. The moment he saw the young man, he was completely paralyzed. He never imagined that his new boss would turn out to be the same person who rode the bus with him every morning and evening, the very person he had been foolishly and secretly in love with all this time. After meeting the new boss, everyone quickly returned to their work. Zhang Xiaohui kept his head down all morning, though he wasn't even sure what he was working on. His colleagues gradually started whispering about the new manager. They said he was young and handsome, that he was the third son of the company's president and had been sent here for experience, that within just a year, he had impressively helped his father open a new branch, that he was the most favored son, with families lining up to introduce their daughters to him, that he was strict and demanding toward his subordinates, but also generous with rewards when work was done well. People eagerly shared gossip from various sources. In their words, Peng Feng was no longer the person Zhang Xiaohui knew. He was practically a legend. Zhang Xiaohui knew that much of the talk was exaggerated. He used to joke about their bosses with his colleagues too. It was harmless fun. But today, he didn't feel like listening, let alone participating. To his own surprise, the feeling inside him was disappointment. Zhang Xiaohui laughed bitterly. How ridiculous. What was he even disappointed about? What right did he have to be disappointed? What qualifications did he have to feel this way? That evening, as soon as work ended, Zhang Xiaohui rushed out of the company to catch his bus. This time, Peng Feng wasn't there. In the following days, life carried on as usual. Zhang Xiaohui still took the same bus every morning and evening, habitually scanning the carriage for Peng Feng, but he never saw him. But that was fine. Zhang Xiaohui continued his routine, gradually moving on from his secret crush. Until one day, Peng Feng cornered Zhang Xiaohui in the break room, demanding, "Zhang Xiaohui, why are you avoiding me? How are you getting to work now? Why haven't I seen you?" Zhang Xiaohui stared at him blankly, then replied after a long pause, "I still take the bus. Oh, maybe I've just been waking up early and leaving earlier lately." Peng Feng was silent for a moment before saying, "I need to talk to you. Come with me after work." Zhang Xiaohui mumbled an "oh," head hanging low, looking listless. Peng Feng gazed at the lips so close to him, and in a sudden impulse, leaned in to kiss Zhang Xiaohui. Not satisfied with just a peck, he sucked on Zhang Xiaohui's lower lip before finally saying, "I've been busy taking over the company these past few days, so I couldn't leave early, but from now on, I'll still go to and from work with you. If you like taking the bus, we'll take the bus. If you want to drive, we'll drive." Zhang Xiaohui was too shocked to process anything else. He grabbed Peng Feng's sleeve and stammered, "Why did you kiss me?" His fingers trembled with nervousness. Seeing Zhang Xiaohui's flustered expression, Peng Feng suddenly calmed down. With a neutral expression, he replied, "Because I like you." Zhang Xiaohui's face turned red. He panicked. "Huh? What does hut mean?" Peng Feng's expression darkened and he coldly asked, "What, am I not allowed to like you? Do you discriminate against gay people?" Zhang Xiaohui stammered, "No, I don't discriminate against, gay people." Hearing that, Peng Feng's expression eased slightly and he let out a faint huff. Zhang Xiaohui carefully observed his face and hesitantly said, "Actually, I like you too." Zhang Xiaohui felt like, for a split second, Peng Feng's expression froze. Then, Peng Feng abruptly turned his head away. Zhang Xiaohui saw his ears and neck flush red above his collar. Peng Feng stiffly grabbed Zhang Xiaohui's hand, squeezed it, then turned even redder before suddenly letting go and striding out of the room. Zhang Xiaohui stood there in a daze, replaying his confession over and over in his mind. He pinched himself hard. Damn, that hurt. This wasn't a dream. Feeling a mix of emotions he couldn't quite describe, Zhang Xiaohui left the break room. As soon as he stepped out, he spotted Peng Feng smoking in the corridor. Peng Feng had one hand in his pocket and the other holding a cigarette, head tilted slightly back. His profile was strikingly handsome. Zhang Xiaohui was mesmerized. Peng Feng noticed the movement and turned to look at him. Their eyes met. Peng Feng hesitated as if debating whether to walk over. Jiang Xiaohui made the decision for him. He stepped forward. "See you tonight," Jiang Xiaohui whispered as he passed by. Peng Feng remained expressionless. Jiang Xiaohui tried to stay calm, but inside he was a mess. Was Peng Feng going to pretend nothing happened? Take back his confession? String him along without taking responsibility? But then Peng Feng suddenly smiled, and his smile grew brighter and brighter. Jiang Xiaohui was completely captivated. He had never realized before that Peng Feng's smile could be so simple and pure. This is the end of the main story. Next is the extra part. One day, after thoroughly teasing Jiang Xiaohui, Peng Feng suddenly remembered something. He nudged Jiang Xiaohui, who was resting his head on his shoulder with his eyes closed. Jiang Xiaohui groggily opened his eyes. "Oh, right. What were you thinking about that day when you missed your stop?" Peng Feng ruffled his hair as he asked. "Which day?" Jiang Xiaohui replied lazily. "That time you rode all the way to the last stop. When I got off and asked why you lived so far away, you said you zoned out before getting off. Hey, the last stop is nowhere near your place. How could you have zoned out for that long?" Jiang Xiaohui stayed silent, thinking, "Because I was so stupid. I was trying to follow you." But Peng Feng seemed to have imagined something entirely different. Seeing Jiang Xiaohui's lack of response, his expression darkened with jealousy. "Tell me, which guy were you thinking about so intently back then?" Jiang Xiaohui tilted his head and studied Peng Feng. Seeing how serious he looked, he couldn't help but marvel. Just how clueless is this guy? We just finished having sex, and he's already digging up old emotional debts. Peng Feng felt awkward under Jiang Xiaohui's gaze, but he still tried to keep a straight face and said with forced generosity, "Fine, I guess I'm not that bothered by it. No. I mean, just be more mindful in the future. After all, I'm your man now, and you." He couldn't continue. Because Jiang Xiaohui, who had been holding back laughter for a long time, finally burst out laughing. "What's so funny?" Peng Feng asked, frustrated. "I'm laughing because you're too adorable." Jiang Xiaohui wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes, barely holding in his laughter. "You're actually jealous of yourself." "What?" "Back then, I had already started having a crush on you. Even when I zoned out, my head was full of thoughts about you. How could I have been thinking about someone else?" Jiang Xiaohui admitted shyly. "Actually, that day, I was curious why you didn't get off at your usual stop. I wanted to see where you were going, so I followed you all the way to the last station." He smiled, feeling a bit embarrassed at his past actions. "Oh yeah, you said that day you were waiting for someone. Did you have to wait long?" Peng Feng pressed his lips together and stared at Jiang Xiaohui. Jiang Xiaohui's smile gradually stiffened. Crap! Peng Feng is super proud and cares about his image. I shouldn't have laughed at him just now. Did I make him mad? But it really was funny, Jiang Xiaohui thought, feeling wronged. Just as he was debating whether to apologize and coax his boyfriend, the blanket was suddenly lifted. Peng Feng moved closer, easily lifting Jiang Xiaohui's legs and wrapping them around his waist. Jiang Xiaohui's eyes widened. Before he had time to react, Peng Feng was already pressing his aroused member into Jiang Xiaohui's entrance. Wait, they were just having a conversation. How did things suddenly turn into this? Slower. Jiang Xiaohui moaned as he cursed inwardly. He hadn't expected that, even after 3 rounds earlier, Peng Feng still had this much stamina. "It's the middle of the night. What are you so excited about?" Jiang Xiaohui roared internally. Peng Feng kept thrusting, sweating as he moved. Soon, all that was left in the room were Jiang Xiaohui's moans, his mind going blank. Peng Feng smirked to himself as he continued his movements. Jiang Xiaohui had liked me that early on? Huh? Turns out both of them had secretly been crushing on each other. Peng Feng would never tell Jiang Xiaohui. That day, on a whim, he had wanted to see where his crush lived, so he had accompanied Jiang Xiaohui all the way to the last stop too.